Joshua Buatsi versus Anthony Yarde. It's a potential British super fight that has drawn interest for years. Two men hailing from the country's capital, contrasting yet respectively exciting styles, and after both men taking care of business within the recent weeks, it is a fight that many believe is now closer than ever.
The respect that's there, which has been alluded to all night. Two London guys, two guys that have grown up together in this scene. It feels like that's a very good forward step in terms of the direction for 2024 for you two together in the ring.
I would be at home if I didn't have interest. I'm here. I believe this fight should be next. Anthony and his team probably think the same, but people know this is...
Buatsi's up for it.
So, and from my side, I'm down with it. I'm sure him and his team feel the same way.
So can we get that going in 2024?
This fight between me and JB is 100 times bigger. Both agreed we're going to get it cracking. We said it behind the scenes. We've always had it in our minds we're going to fight. Now it's about the timing of it.
So there you have it. Both men seemingly up for the fight. And despite the boxing politics, the power struggles, the negotiation nightmares, I genuinely think that this is the time that this fight needs to happen. Or it may never. But people, before we get into all that, welcome back to the Joey Knight Boxing channel. I need you lot to do me a massive, massive favour. I've been working really, really hard on banging this sort of content out for you guys. So if you are not already, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button to help me pump out more of this sort of content for you guys. So as I say, both men sounding like they want the fight, but let's have a look at both Buatsi and Yarde's recent performances. Let's speak about some of the keys to victory for both men and ultimately give a prediction on how I see this fight going. Starting off with Joshua Buatsi's recent performance against Dan Aziz. Good inside work there from Buatsi. A couple of shots to the body. And this is a really competitive matchup with Dan Aziz because Dan Aziz is no mug himself. And, you know, both men have shared a lot of rounds in sparring. Aziz catching Buatsi there with that counter right hand. But Buatsi's got a great chin, man. We've seen that in his fights so far. He can take a shot to come back with a shot. And working really, really well to the body here, Joshua Buatsi. There you have it again, those shots to the body. And they'll be really, really taking a lot out of Dan Aziz. Not a notoriously hard puncher, but you know what? At light heavyweight, man, everyone can punch. Buatsi investing in the body so well, and what that does do is it makes it easier when he goes over the top to the head to find those openings, because as you invest in the body more, your opponent's hands are going to be lowered. But Joshua Buatsi is there to be hit in this fight. Now, I do think that sometimes you take the option to fight fire with fire and engage. And when you don't respect the man's power, definitely to the ability to hurt you that much, as we've seen here, you know, Dan Aziz catching Buatsi with a lot of shots. But Buatsi definitely getting the better of it here. Little right hook to the body, left hook counter. And there's the knockdown. Some would say it was a slip. I think there was a punch landed on the way down. Without the punch landed, does Aziz go down? And then again, unsteady on his feet. Bounces down. Big respect between both men. As I say, they were sparring partners before. They'd be friends after the fight. And a great British dust up there. So that's obviously Buatsi's most recent performance. But let's take a little look at Anthony Yarde's recent win over Marko Nikolic. So straight off the back, we should say that, you know, to anyone that doesn't understand their boxing or understand it at this level you're seeing Anthony Yarde fight at here is obviously a massive step down from the level that Joshua Buatsi was last fighting at against Dan Aziz. Marko Nikolic, I didn't know him before. Record didn't look all that bad, but listen, sometimes the records don't look bad, and actually that isn't really a show of how good an opponent is. And Anthony Yarde looking very much in control here. Marko Nikolic throwing some back, but there's a lot of things that Anthony Yarde in this bout is getting away with here that I just don't genuinely believe in a fight against a higher level opposition he's going to be able to do. You see the way that Anthony Yarde will keep hands. Great body shot there. Great body shot to drop his opponent. But Anthony Yarde will keep hands on his opponent. He'll tap him with that jab. And against a man that's very fearful of Yarde's power and ability, you're going to be able to do that. Yarde really putting his shots together here. Good flurries there. Yeah, you're going to be able to throw these little tappy shots in there to be able to set up your next shots. But against a man like Buatsi that has real power coming back at you and good ability, it's going to be a lot harder. You see Yarde there dropping him with that right hand to the body. Short hook, and that really just takes the sails out of you. Vicious body shot. Completely winded him. And Nikolic, if I am pronouncing that right, I could be butchering it. he's in no position to continue there, and Anthony Yarde getting the win. So both men clearly looking very impressive in their recent performances, but it must be noted that the level of opposition is completely contrasting. And when you compare the resume of both fighters, Anthony Yarde's resume at a glance can be very baffling because there's no gradual increase in the level of opposition. Anthony Yarde will literally go from fighting guys who are ranked 300th in the world rankings to fighting a Sergey Kovalev. He can fight Koikov, if I'm pronouncing that right, number 343 in the world rankings, jumping all the way up to fighting a pound-for-pound star in Artur Beterbiev. Now, I don't really think that this is a great game plan to be bringing on any fighter and improving any fighter. And the problem with Anthony Yarde is it's not like he's doing these sort of jumps in his fights, but then he's replicating the level of opposition in sparring, because anyone that's followed Anthony Yarde's career will know that it's quite well known. Anthony Yarde does not actually spar hard, or at least it's rumoured that he doesn't. Anthony Yarde does a lot of like pad work sparring, like we've seen Mayweather do in the past, and Anthony Yarde also does a lot of body sparring. And listen, there are benefits to not sparring hard. It can obviously enhance the longevity in your career. Less miles on the clock, less wear and tear in the gym, less chance of injury, and therefore more chance that you're going to get in the ring 100% in terms of no niggles, no pains, no aches, and no injuries. But what it does do is it means that when you come to the biggest fights on the biggest stages, in my opinion, you're desperately unprepared. And listen, Anthony Yarde is supremely talented. He has good lateral movement. I think he has decent power. Despite the 2 knockout losses on his record, I actually think he has a decent chin. And in those losses, he showed great heart. However, I can't help but feel that under a different coach, maybe under a different training setup, Anthony Yarde could have got more to this point out of his career. Because in a career nearly spanning a decade, Anthony Yarde's best win is Lyndon Arthur. And that's no disrespect to Lyndon Arthur. He's a very good boxer. But if you're looking at the top of the division, look at what Bivol has just done to Lyndon Arthur. And you might argue that he's lost in respectable fashion to the likes of Beterbiev and the likes of Kovalev, but at the end of the day, losses are still losses. And I truly believe that the talent that Anthony Yarde has does deserve, at this point in his career, at least one really commendable name on his record. And then we look at Joshua Buatsi's resume to this point, and just a glance can tell you that this man has definitely mixed in the better level of opposition so far as a pro, but also as an amateur. Now, we all know that Joshua Buatsi boxed at the 2016 Olympics. However, even on home soil, he was fighting guys that we now know from the domestic scene and getting good wins over them. Because while on the way up in the amateurs, working his way towards trying to secure a spot in that GB team for the 2016 Olympics, Buatsi beat the likes of Craig Spider Richards, Jack Massey, Zach Parker, Lyndon Arthur. And then once turning professional, I'm of the opinion that Buatsi moved at a much faster rate than Anthony Yarde did. Within his first 10 or so fights, Buatsi was fighting the likes of Liam Conroy, Reynold Quinlan, Marco Antonio Periban. Now, let's have it right. These guys weren't world beaters by a long shot, but what I'm saying is I classed them as a slight level above what Anthony Yarde was fighting in his first 10 fights or so. He then fought back-to-back unbeaten fighters in the likes of Marco Kalic and Daniel Dos Santos before recently stepping up the levels once again, fighting the likes of Bolotniks, Craig Spider Richards for the second time, this time as a pro, and Dan Aziz just a couple of weeks ago. And after seeing Joshua Buatsi and being really, really impressed by him in the 2016 Olympics, him then turning pro a year later, 2017, and now around 7 years into his pro career, I'm actually relatively surprised at the fact that he hasn't yet boxed for a world title. But Joshua Buatsi and every other light heavyweight, to be honest, can probably count himself massively unlucky that they are around in an era where you've got both Beterbiev and Bivol. And that means that purely down to timing of when he's come along, maybe he was best served not fighting for a world title yet. And if he was to lose to Anthony Yarde, maybe Joshua Buatsi never would fight for a world title. And just to say that sounds absolutely mental when I look back and think at the expectations I had for this man when he turned pro. And I'm sure that'll be Joshua Buatsi's long-term goal, but I honestly can't downplay just how important these huge domestic dust-ups can be. So if they were to meet in the next fight, these are the keys to victory for both men. Now, I believe that Joshua Buatsi is going to have to draw from that boxing skill, the amateur pedigree that he has, and if he's going to look at any any of Anthony Yarde's losses, he's probably going to be best served looking at the losses to Sergey Kovalev and Lyndon Arthur rather than the Artur Beterbiev loss. Because Beterbiev is very, very unique in his style. 99 out of 100 fighters could not apply the same sort of pressure that Beterbiev does without draining their own resistance. And the simplistic thing to do is to look at the chin. If you put all of that front foot pressure on, you would imagine sooner rather than later, you're going to leave yourself exposed. And at this moment in time, having not seen it tested as much, I can't bank on the fact that Joshua Buatsi has as good a chin as Artur Beterbiev and that Joshua Buatsi could withstand the amount of fire that Artur Beterbiev can and still be effective in his pressure. But regardless of how good your chin is, with constant come forward pressure brings the opportunity for your opponent to be able to land counters on you and most notably clip you to the body often. And if Anthony Yarde was able to do that on Joshua Buatsi, it is down the line going to zap some of the power out of Joshua Buatsi's shots. Now, when Anthony Yarde doesn't really respect an opponent's power, you can see him navigate his way around a better boxer, like he did in the Lyndon Arthur rematch. So I am of the opinion that the three things that you need to stop Anthony Yarde being able to do this is a combination of fundamental boxing skill, respectable power, and the ability to take a shot. And Joshua Buatsi has all three of these things, but with the wrong game plan, these attributes can be lessened as a fight goes on. I think the jab of Joshua Buatsi is undeniably better than that of Anthony Yarde's. It seems sharper, longer, thrown from a better structure, and if I'm Joshua Buatsi, I really want to go jab heavy in these first 4 rounds. Because if he does that, I do see Joshua Buatsi getting the better of things at mid to long range. And if that happens, at some point, Anthony Yarde's going to have to become less cautious, throw caution to the wind and potentially become a little bit more reckless with Joshua Buatsi. And I do think that the timing of Buatsi will then play a factor because he will potentially be able to chop down on Anthony Yarde as he comes in with more reckless shots. Now, do I think that Joshua Buatsi can stop Anthony Yarde? Yes. Do I think that Joshua Buatsi can beat Anthony Yarde on points? Yes. But do I think Joshua Buatsi will simply opt to box his way to a points decision? No. That is an outcome I find hugely unlikely, and I base that off what we've seen from Joshua Buatsi so far in his career. Joshua Buatsi is very much willing to engage, to fight fire with fire sometimes, and he's very comfortable on the inside. And if he does all those things, ironically, I think this is where Yarde has his best chance at winning the fight. So as simple as it might sound, my key to victory for Anthony Yarde is to do what Dan Aziz did, but just back himself to be able to do it better. And ultimately, this is why there's so much uncertainty in an Anthony Yarde win, because I'm saying that he needs to do what Aziz did, but do it better. But is Anthony Yarde even better than Dan Aziz? Is there any wins on Anthony Yarde's resume that Dan Aziz wouldn't have won? So as I say, there's a lot more uncertainty that Anthony Yarde could do what I believe he needs to do to win in this fight, but for what it's worth, this is what I think Yarde would need to do. Dan Aziz had to walk through fire to be able to land his own shots on Joshua Buatsi. And as moronic as it might sound to non-fight fans, I think this is what Anthony Yarde needs to do, you know? I think Anthony Yarde needs to tuck up, shell up, use that weaving and bobbing movement on the inside and back himself to be able to land big shots in the exchanges as Joshua Buatsi throws. Because if Anthony Yarde does show willingness to engage, if he tucks up and uses that lateral movement on the inside, I just don't think that Joshua Buatsi can resist the temptation to step in close and fight on the inside with Anthony Yarde. So I then think it becomes a high risk, high reward fight for Anthony Yarde, where he needs to throw in the spaces and bank on catching Buatsi in between his shots. Because if Anthony Yarde wants to step off at range and have a jab fest with Joshua Buatsi, I just don't think he's got any chance of winning that. I think Yarde's just going to have to accept that it's him or me in there, and I'm going to bank on it being him, because when you look at the performance of Dan Aziz against Buatsi, I don't think technically Dan Aziz had any trouble landing the shots on Buatsi. I think what Dan Aziz had trouble with was standing up to the barrage of punches that would inevitably come back after he was landing those shots on Buatsi. Now, I get that barring the losses to Kovalev and Beterbiev, Dan Aziz has boxed, especially in his wins, at a much higher level than Anthony Yarde. You know, Dan Aziz has good wins over domestic guys, and we can't really say the same for Anthony Yarde. But Dan Aziz does have a 65% knockout ratio. Anthony Yarde boasts a 97% knockout ratio. So if we are to go on those ratios, the records would suggest that Anthony Yarde does have more punch power than Dan Aziz. So in a nutshell, I think that Anthony Yarde needs to bank on that equaliser, landing something big and putting a serious dent in Joshua Buatsi. Now, to say that I don't think Anthony Yarde's going to win a boxing match against Joshua Buatsi doesn't mean that I don't think Anthony Yarde can win on points. But if he does win on points, I see it being a fight that maybe he's been able to, as I say, put a dent, drop Joshua Buatsi a couple of times in, and then labour to a points victory that way. Anthony Yarde's game plan needs to be to hurt Joshua Buatsi. And obviously, it might sound a little bit weird saying that it's a boxing match. Of course, it's to hurt each other. But I do think that Joshua Buatsi can opt for different game plans, different styles in this fight. Whereas for me, it's quite clear that Anthony Yarde has one way to box Joshua Buatsi. And because of that, I'm obviously going to side with the man that I think has more sort of avenues and more outcomes in which I could potentially see them winning this fight. Joshua Buatsi could implement different stylistic approaches to this fight, and that's why I believe that he'll win. But one thing I do know is I just can't see this fight being a boring one. And if it's not a boring one, if it's closer than maybe I potentially believed that it would be, we could definitely see a rematch here. We could see a British trilogy here, and why not? You know, as I say, in a weight division where you've got Bivol, you've got Beterbiev, maybe the guys at the domestic scene should just start really getting it on. And think about a round robin between these guys, man. Imagine if Callum Smith was to come back as well. Dan Aziz definitely in the mix, gave a really good account of himself. We can see some massive domestic dust-ups in the light heavyweight division, and as the time ticks on, now is the time that we need to see them. But people, that's just my thoughts on this potential British matchup, but I want to know what you guys think. Who do you think has the edge in this fight? Who has the better resume so far? And what are the keys to victory? Once again, people, thank you very, very much for making it round to the end of another video. If you like the content and you want to see more from myself, please hit the subscribe button, smash the like button, and let me know in the comments section what fights, what potential fights, or what boxing news in general you want to see me cover next time. I will see you all in the next one.